You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, and a very special episode indeed. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
And I'm Jessie Stevens.
And we're gathered here today to talk about what is undoubtedly one of the television events of the year.
The Logies.
You're totally going to be at the Logies
next
year.
Do you think we'll go to the Logies?
You two will be at the Logies. I fucking need an excuse to tag along in this trip.
You know that's my worst nightmare.
Oh, you say that. I'd love to go. Holly and I'd go.
Yeah. I'll dress up as Mia. So the TV event of the year, to be clear, is a TV show called Strife. And today I am joined by the executive producer and one of the co-producers and writers who also just so happen to be my co-host, most excellent friends and colleagues, Mia Freedman and Jessie Stevens.
Thank you.
So, context. I remember the launch of Mia's book, Work-Strife Balance. It was in 2000.
Malcolm Turnbull, was it?
Yeah. The Prime Minister of the country came to Mia's book launch. Has the Prime Minister ever been to your book launch?
No. I have a memory of your son eating too many donuts and vomiting, but also
he did.
The Prime Minister was there.
Your dad was there, Jessie. It was
My
the first
dad,
time I met
yes.
them, your
Yeah.
parents.
Everyone brought their kids. It was really fun.
My daughter came and I've got a photo of her standing next to Malcolm Turnbull looking up at him approvingly, and I was like, not our politics. Look away.
That day was mad.
It was
mad.
But that book, 6 years later, has now become a TV show. Well, it's inspired a TV show, that memoir. We are not going to spoil any big plot points from the show Strife in this episode, but we do, of course, reference a few things that's happened. So if you want everything to be a surprise, go and watch it before we start.
Mia, why don't we start by you telling people, because this is going to be the biggest question, what does inspired by mean?
Yeah.
It means it's fiction.
Yeah, so a fictionalized version of your memoir.
It's the closest I'll ever get to being involved in fiction, because you two are very good at fiction. You write fiction, but I've never been interested in writing fiction. But what I've enjoyed about this process is that you get to have so much more creative freedom when you don't have to stick to the facts of your life.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
We now have Strife. It is an 8-part, I'm calling it a prestige TV project.
Oh, love that.
It's so good.
Yeah, it looks
it's
amazing.
So classy. It's produced by the best in the world. We're going to talk about that, of course. And it stars Asha Keddy as not Mia. Asha plays Evelyn Jones, a former magazine powerhouse who starts a woman's website. Ev has 2 children, is newly divorced, has a doctor best friend, and is quite chaotic. First of all, we need to know how it happened. Mia, how did your book, Work-Strife Balance, become Strife?
So when I was about 20 or 21, probably 20 actually, just starting out in my career at Clio as a beauty writer, I met this girl who was working as a booker for a photographers and creatives agency. She and I would speak all the time because I would have to book photographers for shoots. And her name was Bruna Papandrea. And we became such fast friends, and it was such an incredibly intense, amazing best friendship for a period of a couple of years. Out of similar time in our careers. She wanted to be a producer, and she produced her first film when she was still here. It's called Better Than Sex with David Wenham and Susie Porter. And then she moved overseas to London. Because it was pre-internet days, which sounds hilarious, it was the 90s, we didn't stay in touch. Like, in our early 20s, you weren't going to write letters to each other and you didn't have people's phone numbers. So we lost touch for years, but obviously I saw her career progress and she was always going to be amazing. She was one of the most driven, talented people I'd ever known. You'd sometimes just meet people. I thought this when I met Zoe Foster-Blake. You just know they're going to be a big fucking deal. And she was and she is. And so she went on to produce amazing things like Wild and Gone Girl and Big Little Lies, and became one of the top producers in Hollywood. And not just female producers, not Australian producers, but producers full stop. Anyway, we sort of reconnected when she was in Sydney a few years ago, around the time my book came out, Work-Strife Balance. And I did a no filter with her, and she read my book and was like, we've got to make this into a show. I just thought she was sort of being nice, but Bruna doesn't fuck around like that. And she was serious. And over the next 7 years, Jessie,
Yeah.
I straight away said, well, the only way I'll do it is if Jessie and Claire are involved, because I knew that I didn't have the patience or the discipline or the time or the desire to be involved in the writing. But I knew that if it didn't have them involved, I didn't want to do it. So they were involved from the very beginning as producers and then writers. And we had writers' rooms and we sort of fucked around for a few years in development and I kept losing interest. But it wasn't until we found Sarah Scheller, who was the executive producer and head writer of The Letdown, that brilliant ABC show about motherhood. And it was during COVID that we found her and she became attached to the project. We met her via Zoom and she was living in LA at the time with her family, but she's Australian. And once she became attached, then things ramped up. Then we had writers' rooms and then the next phase was Asha getting attached. And Bruna had worked with Asha before in Nine Perfect Strangers and then in The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. And she'd done a few heavy things, those two projects in particular, back to back. And Asha was like, I want to do something that's comedy next. That was amazing. So Asha and I met. She came on board also, not just as a star, but as an executive producer. And then, you know, Jessie and Claire and the writers, we had a Bible and we had an outline. And that's when Asha was attached, we had that first script, I think, for the pilot.
Yeah.
Then we talked to different streamers and who was going to do it. And that's when we went with Binge.
I want to ask, and maybe it's best to ask you, Jessie, the character of Evelyn. So I remember this, you're very much like, it's not going to be me, then it's Asha Keddy. Wow, it's Asha Keddy, blah, blah, blah. How much Mia, how much not? You, as obviously one of the co-producers and being in all the writers' rooms, developing the person who's Evelyn, who isn't Mia but is Mia, how does that happen?
Well, Holly, of all people, I reckon that you'll understand it probably more than most because it's how fiction works, right? So you often start with a character that maybe is a bit reminiscent of yourself or someone you think of, and then you take them into new scenarios, new settings, and you have them meet new people where they evolve into something different. In saying that, it was really useful in the room to have the context of like, what's the wildest thing she could do? And it's like, oh, Mia did this stupid shit yesterday.
Yeah.
Maybe Evelyn could do that. There were some similarities there, but there are lots of ways in which Evelyn as a character is very different to Mia because the science of writing is there has to be particular flaws that intersect with a plot. There are themes that come through. And she definitely behaves in ways throughout the series that Mia wouldn't. And so when I am writing, and now we're writing season 2, when I am writing as Evelyn, I'm not thinking of Mia.
Ash has inhabited the character so much. And I think that part of the creation of Evelyn comes on the page and then the other part comes in Ash's performance of it.
What's it like watching her? Because as someone who wasn't involved, I can see you in there. It's not you, but I can see you. Can you see you?
No. Sorry, I can see Evelyn, and that's what Ash is so incredible at. Like, we spent some time together, but she was
What kind of time? Like, did she study you? Were you talking to her and she was like, blinks twice when lying? Like, was it like that?
Well, she'd already read the book, which is interesting, before the idea of the project came up. So she kind of knew who I was and she was familiar with the inspiration behind it. But she also had no desire to play. And we'd already decided this before we approached her, that it wasn't going to be
You never
me.
wanted it to be
No.
like Paper Giants where it is Ita.
No, she's
Never
done
gonna
that
be
before.
Yeah.
And she said she enjoys playing real people. It's a really interesting challenge. But that's not what any of us ever were going to do with this project. But before she kind of signed on for sure, she and I needed to meet, right? Because I'm an executive producer. So I guess if we'd have hated each other, she wouldn't have wanted to do it. You know, she might have hated me or I might have said, here's what I think it should be and you're going to have to do. And she would have just gone like, nah. So I went over to her house. I wish I had a photo of us, actually. We had a cup of tea, of course, having read a little bit about me and in my book knew that tea was very important. And we just hit it off like straight away. And then I was like, let's go to dinner tomorrow night. And she's like, okay. So then we went to dinner and then she was going to Bruna's 50th in Greece with her family and a lot of people were from all around the world and I'd been invited and I'd thought of not going. And then at dinner she said she was going and I was like, should I go? Maybe I'll go. And within about 5 days, my whole family was on a plane. So we got to spend quite a bit of time together in Greece with our families, which was really lovely as well. And so anyway, I don't know what her process is. I can't wait to talk to her on No Filter and interview her about that, which I haven't done at the time of recording this yet. But back to your original question about an hour and a half ago of what it was like to watch her, it was like a masterclass, like just watching her inhabit a character that wasn't Asha, it wasn't me.
It wasn't any character she'd done before.
It wasn't Nina Proudman, it was Evelyn Jones. And it was amazing to watch.
Mia was there for a lot more than Claire and I were, but we went on to set. And to watch her in action
saying your words,
that was really weird because you wrote something down. That was really helpful actually to have Asha attached. So to just imagine her as Evelyn saying it. To watch her even the stop-starting of scenes and then her go back in. I think from the outside you kind of go, I could be an actress. You know, of course I could be an actress. And you watch her and you're like, no, I bloody couldn't.
No, I
couldn't. The patience, the tiny inflection of a voice, what she brought to that script. You would write a line that you didn't even realise was funny and it would come out of her mouth and you'd go, oh, that is funny. Or just her interpretation of it and the way that she worked with the rest of the cast as well. She's a real leader, I think. And that was just inspiring watching her do her thing.
Can I ask you, Jessie, to tell us a little bit about how writing a TV show works, right? Because there's a writer's room, as you've already discussed. There's a kind of boss person of the writing who's Sarah, I assume. But then different episodes are written by different people, which is very often the case.
I've always found that
and
so
I've always
weird.
found that weird too. So how do you make sure that your episodes all hang together, that Evelyn isn't like a different person in one episode to the next, that she says something in one that she wouldn't in yours? Is that restrictive or is it freeing? Or tell us how it works for those of us who aren't in that world.
The intensity of that writer's room, like to go in and spend 9 to 5 for weeks on end, you know, first developing the characters. Who is this character? What do they do? Blah, 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 almost profiles. And then you almost do beats, like a storyboard of the general arc of the season. And then you go into episodes. And it's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So there's a lot of structure.
Within each episode.
Within each episode. There's a lot of structure with each, and then that fits into a broader thing, right?
So there's like science. Like I wasn't across any of this. I came and visited the writer's room a couple of times and just sort of vomited
anecdotes
and then left. You know, it was like something out of A Beautiful Mind. When you entered the writer's room, there were like these whiteboards with just all these elaborate notes and diagrams.
In different colours, because this represents this character's arc and this represents this. And then someone will go, I mean, Romina was one of the writers in there and she's just written on every Australian show. The way that her mind worked, she would go, that's not working for an Act 3, or that's not working for that character arc, or that isn't consistent with what she did in episode 1, which to work alongside that was fantastic.
Like I imagine you guys have a similar process or structure when you're crafting a novel because you need
It's a lot more structured. This is why, like, people who write novels, I've been like, you would love a writer's room because it's not isolated.
I'd really like someone else to do all that structure for me.
Yes, to have that up and to go, you know how when you're writing, you go, well, what does she do next? Imagine if you had 7 minds to go, how about this, how about this? There's something so candid because you've got to go, this might be shit, but you get somewhere good. But what that then means is that when you go to write your episode, you have a very clear outline. You are not writing from scratch. It's like, you've basically got a scene breakdown already. Then what you do is flesh it out, put a scene breakdown, that goes through all the producers. It comes back with notes. Then you do draft 1, goes to producers, come back. I reckon 10, 15 drafts on episodes.
Imagine how bored I got.
Oh my God.
After the first
loved
draft.
it. I loved that element.
Yes.
And because you've got the leadership of Sarah, she's going through all of them and going, oh, this character's not consistent here. Or maybe we would have a scene from our episode taken somewhere else and someone else's scene. Like it's all moving around like that. And the other thing that Claire and I got to do.
So you can't be precious about your words or any of it.
And that's brilliant because you're just cutting constantly.
And you and Claire did it together, of course.
Yes. And what was an incredible opportunity was that we got to go through all 8 eps and have a Sarah say to us, do the headlines read true?
Yeah.
Is the wording right? Is the lingo like just certain things that if you worked in media would this stick out?
So that was part of obviously your and Claire's role as producers.
Because one of the most annoying things, like when I've watched, you know, The Devil Wears Prada did it well in reflecting magazines, but when you are from that world and you see that world recreated, it drives you crazy if it's not real. And that's what world building is, right?
Yeah.
And so because women's media and digital media is so specific, I knew that without Claire and Jessie, who knew things that I didn't know because they've been in meetings over a long period of time that I haven't been in, it wouldn't ring true.
Yeah. The show is set at the beginning of Eve, which is the website.
2012.
So it's set in 2012, so a bit of a different time, bit of a different internet. I want to know from you, Mia, as EP, did you have power of veto? And although obviously, as we've already expressed many times, Eve is not you, you know that there will be some commentary here that equates you to. Were there any things you were like, well, I don't want her to do that, or she can't do that? Did you have a sort of yay, nay on those things?
We had those conversations really early on. What was interesting for me is how collaborative it was. And because you've got the trust of all of these people who are invested in the character, everyone wanted her to be real and authentic and not perfect, because that's the whole point of it. But everyone was very clear about what the character would and wouldn't do. Does that make sense, Jessie?
Yeah.
So those kind of decisions were made much earlier on in the writer's room when we talked about what the general arcs would be. In terms of would she say this, would she, again, I don't remember a time where I was like, absolutely not.
Evelyn gets herself into trouble. She says the wrong thing in inverted commas. She is too candid on a live TV show. She, writes a clickbait headline that nearly gets her cancelled. All of those things that we know from our world and we know from your career. So in that way, were you worried? Were you nervous?
I mean, I feel sick about the whole thing, obviously. I want to vomit a lot. Of course. Yes. There are some things that are specific to women's media, but there are also things that are fairly universal to women who are working outside the home in their 40s. And even just not just the idea of mental load and guilt and responsibility and identity and all of those kinds of things and relationships. All of those things are bits of everybody. So
there were chats in the early stages. I feel like you were more protective of the people around you. So there was discussions about some of things that the kids would do. And we had to be really careful, the kids and the husband. Like, for example, the divorce storyline. If we'd made him out to be a real monster, would that have been a little bit defaming to Jason? You felt very protective of those people. And I remember by accident, we're in the writer's room and there's a best friend that's loosely based on one of Mia's friends.
That's actually one of my favourite things in the whole thing is the relationship between Evelyn and Lucy, her best friend, is beautifully drawn. And there are some
really
great arguments in there. And I loved finding out about her marriage. That gave the show a lot of depth that I really enjoyed.
There were moments where, so she has kids and there was a thing about the names of the kids or whatever and they made them up and I was like, they're the real names? Can we please check? Weird things like that where you then go, oh, this is accidentally becoming too close to home.
I do have a close friend who's a doctor and the reason we wanted that was that it's really important to also have a perspective from outside the media bubble.
Which I loved.
Which is true to life.
People who are actually saving lives.
Yeah, exactly.
They have a very real female friendship. They have rows. They get a bit annoyed with each other. There's deep love. I could see a lot of
and when we were casting that, it was really interesting. Oh, the casting process was fascinating too.
Yes, I want to know about that.
But Asha was very vocal and completely correct about the fact that she needed someone that could be her equal in scenes.
So things like age were really important as well.
Exactly.
They had to look, and age is funny because sometimes
they
you don't
come
look
up together.
Yes, exactly right.
I totally
because
bought
Asha is such a personality, she has such presence that other person, I think she had to be quite tall.
She needed gravitas, and I think that Emma Leung is younger than Asha. I'm actually not sure how old Emma is, but she's really got gravitas about her, but she's also got lightness. I love their friendship too. It's one of my favourite things.
So tell me a bit about casting, because obviously we've talked about Asha and how she sort of came first, as it were. But there's other really big names in this. Matt Day, I love because my age. Jonathan LaPaglia, I love because hot dude.
And also, and people keep saying you've got to talk about Survivor more because Survivor people need to know that he's in it.
My kids will be excited about that. Kylie Minogue makes a cameo. Is that a spoiler?
She does. No, it's not a spoiler. I think probably everybody's seen the episode by now.
How did you colour in all those smaller roles, all the, the staff of Eve, all the backstory? How does casting work for all those people?
Well, you have a casting director. And obviously they have all the scripts and they talk to the proper producers, which is not me, about what they're sort of looking for. And it's funny, having read the script all the time and thought about it, I had ideas in my head of the types of people. But that's why casting is really interesting because you might look at 20 people for one role and they will give you 20 different versions of that character. So it's really like a puzzle because then you have this person's great for that, but then what does that mean for that other character? And it has to,
Yeah.
they have to bring something different. And if this person's got really good comedic beats, then the other person maybe doesn't need that so much. So
Yeah.
it was really
It was
interesting.
funny having written it and having had these characters in our head for such a long time. The one for me that was lifted off the page if I had drawn and invented Jeet. Like Jeet was exactly how I imagined her.
So she's the one that Evelyn hires randomly at 2:00 in the morning and says, come into the office.
Claire and I had invested a lot into that character. But then someone like Penny, not how I necessarily imagined her when
She's like the
writing,
parenting editor.
took it to a whole new place that was amazing.
And Penny brings her kid to work all the time.
Yeah.
Who sits in the stroller and is snotty and screams.
His name's Storm.
I love that.
Well, the funny thing is that Storm was meant to be in more scenes, but it's hard to work with children.
I felt Storm was in plenty of scenes.
Storm, there was more for Storm
It
to do.
felt,
But
which I know is not accidental, that as the 8 episodes go on, like the chaos of that newsroom between the dog and the child and the heightened tension and stakes of what's happening every day, beautifully
I'm
done.
so glad. I mean, we're way too close to it, obviously, to have any sense of how it's going to be received.
I have to ask about clothes, right? Because I think we all expected, and this is probably because of our lazy assumptions, maybe that Evelyn and Mia were closer than they are.
Asha would
except
just raid Mia's wardrobe.
Yeah, of course. And Mia famously has many clothes and many tutus, sparkles, colours. Today, as we talk, she's wearing
Every colour.
I don't know
do we
what to
think?
call that.
This is not what happened. Tell me, did you want to be involved in wardrobe, and how are those choices made for Evelyn to be much more sophisticated?
Can you imagine how much I wanted to be involved in wardrobe? I also just assumed that that would be a feature of Evelyn because I'm obviously such a fan of Sex and the City, that canon, and the way clothes tell a part of the story. And I've always felt that I just couldn't see how she could not be that, even though I didn't see the character as me. It's weird. But Asha was adamant, and the head of wardrobe was adamant that it wouldn't be that. And at first I was a bit like, oh, well, I don't know about that. That's not fun. But she couldn't have been more right about that. And I think that's one of the clear ways that she draws a distinction because I feel like, first of all, that would have been a bit caricature and distracting. And I think that, you know, that's something also we heard from our writer, Stuart Bowen, about he didn't want the clothes to be distracting. And I kept saying, I want the clothes to be another character. And he's like, no, I don't want people to be looking at the clothes in every scene. And I get that. And so the funny thing that's happened is that Asha had such a clear vision for how she wanted Evelyn to look. And it is different to everybody else on the show and very different to me, except for today. That's how I've started dressing,
so true.
if you
Jackets.
noticed.
She wears great jackets. There is a particular red one, the one she wears when she's meeting the prime ministerial candidate. And they're both wearing a red jacket and she has to take hers off.
It's a great jacket.
But the pointy shoulders.
Wide-legged pants and shirts, and you should see my wardrobe. So I've been so influenced. And that's kind of how Asha dresses in her real life. But my wardrobe did get raided. I was very excited I think they were just throwing me a bone. So they came in here and also to my house and went through all my stuff and grabbed some things for the character of Opal, who's like the kind of entertainment, younger, vibey,
beauty,
rock chick kind of thing. And they took a bunch of my things and she wore a couple of them.
It was funny. Evelyn's wardrobe, I think, is something that going forward as well is going to evolve with her character. And when you look at her character as someone who's come from a more corporate, well, even the magazine world, I think, which was really run by men, then that wardrobe makes sense and is very in line with her character.
It'd be interesting to see what she wears in season 2.
Yeah, it's definitely
because that
evolving.
becomes part of the plot as well because it's like, how do we present ourselves to the world through our clothes?
I'm not going to ask too many more questions because I know that all of our Out Louders are, if they haven't inhaled it in the 4 days it's been released, they're probably right in the middle of it now. And we're going to be talking about it lots in other podcasts. And on Mamamia Out Loud, I have a million questions and feelings about it. But is there anything in there you wish wasn't in there, Mia?
Ooh. Oh, no. No, there's lots of things that I wish were in there that aren't in there. Like some of the script and some of the scenes that we shot had to be cut just because of time and the way it looks. And, you know, you have to make peace with that.
There was so much brilliance and then you carve this thing out of stone and you go, oh, wow, we lost a whole other season of great stuff.
Yeah.
That's like, oh, that funny. But you've just got to kill your darlings.
What's your favourite bit and what's left? Obviously, episode 4 is the one that Claire and
Episode 4
Jessie
is the one we
Stevens
wrote. The reason I'm proud of that episode is because I think it is when the concept of the pile-on and the accidental putting your foot in it, when you're trying to do the right thing and it backfires, starts. So I think I really like the scene and it was really fun to write. So to watch it come to life has been amazing, where she dresses as Marie Antoinette. That seeing Asha Keddy dressed as Marie Antoinette made to look like a fool.
In this episode that Claire and Jessie wrote, Evelyn is being trailed by a journalist who's writing a feature profile, and she goes to do the shoot and they dress her as Marie Antoinette.
And just the irony of her whole thing is about Photoshop and authenticity, and she's got her eyelashes still on, and like that was meant to convey the tension that we're all living in constantly about the paradox of individual choice. And I love the scene where she's in the car and she's saying, you know, men are just getting on with it while we're all fighting among ourselves. I think there was a lot of commentary that we could do through fiction, which is what excited all the producers the most, I think.
What about you, Mia? What's your favourite part?
3 scenes that I think about a lot. The first is in the first episode in the live TV show. And that's something that when I read it for the first time, I won't spoil it, but when I read it for the first time, I think I spat my tea out.
Yes, me too.
And Claire came up with that, didn't she?
Yeah.
It was like nothing I'd ever seen, but something that I could relate to so much because of the stupid shit you're asked to do in photo shoots or on live TV or on radio. I loved the scene in the car where she was saying that stuff that I think a lot of women will relate to. And also the scene that is the version of Q&A.
That is absolutely so mortifying to watch that scene. Q&A is kind of replicated with a feisty older feminist legend and an internet young feminist colleague and an intersectional
so fun.
Nigerian feminist writer.
Yeah.
And
it just goes
Evelyn.
to shit.
And it is,
of course it goes
I
to
was
shit.
watching it with I literally was through my fingers. So beautifully
I remember
done.
the theme, like coming up with that, talking about matricide, which I think we actually talked about on, I think a lot of Out Louders will watch it and go, oh, they
that's
talked
so
about that.
true.
They're going to see a lot of Out Loud Easter eggs. So yeah, it was about matricide and kind of killing those above you in the new waves of feminism. So there's a lot of themes. I just cannot wait to hear what the Out Louders think.
Out Louders, we cannot wait to hear what you think about this show. We hope you've enjoyed this special. There are going to be some more specials about Strife dropping in your feed, so keep an eye on it. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, go and check it right now on Binge. A link will be in the show notes here that'll take you straight there. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you, Hol.
It's like interviewing talent and it's so all very weird. Thank you for listening to us, as always, on Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman. Audio production is by Leah Porges. Bye.
Bye.